Welcome to Spring Everyday. In this video, I would like to explain everything that you will need to know to build a Spring Boot MVC complete project for a real-life, real business application. So in this application, what we intend to build is like a forum. So user can post topic and then discuss the topic by comments. So first, the architect. The architecture of this Spring Boot project is rather simple. If you look at this diagram, Spring Boot MVC as a big block, and it serves the HTTP request from a browser or browsers, user browsers, and also it used the MySQL database or any other database to persist the data, and it make use of the Okta for the authentication purpose. Second, we discuss about the MVC layers. So MVC is not only in Spring, but MVC is a way of construct the application or web application. So it consists as a view layer, a control layer, and a model layer. In Spring Boot, we use the time leaf for the view. We use Spring Controller as the controller. We use service and JPA together as the model, and then we talk to the database. Of all the many IDE or tools can use for build Spring Boot project, of all those tools, I would recommend use Visual Studio Code. This is because Visual Studio Code has lots of extensions that are available for us to build our project. So in this window, you can see this is the Visual Studio Code, and the installed is what I have installed for my Visual Studio Code tool. For Spring Boot, you need to install the thing you need to install is Spring Boot tool, Spring Boot Initializer, and the Spring Boot dashboard. Okay, so for because we're using Java, so there are some Java support debugger, Mervin, and tester. That is necessary for the Java purpose. I also installed other extensions for my productivity. So if you are interested, leave the message in the comments and let me know if you like to understand more about the extension. Spring Boot Initializer. Spring Boot Initializer is a tool for us to start or create the Spring Boot project from scratch. To bring up the Spring Boot Initializer, you click this button and get the command palette, and the command palette would have a Spring Initializer. If you type in Spring, so you can Spring create a Mervin project. So create a Mervin project is what you need to start the Spring Boot project from scratch. For me, I have created a project as forum, so I have done that. Because this application we need to use a database, so we prepared the database. The database is outside of the Spring Boot concept. For me, I have installed a Spring Boot database extension. So I have create my database in MySQL server, which is the local server, and create a table for myself. And to create the table, I used a script for that purpose. So you create a table, and you can create the table and create the foreign key, the relationship. So this is how you prepare the database. You run this script to your database and prepare it. So if you look at the database we have created, this is the database. So this is the table. I have the ID, I have author, so those columns. Project folders. So after you use the Spring Initializer to create a Spring Boot project, and they will create some folders for you, and also you would create some new folders for the purpose of the application. So the folders you need to create in this project is like, so everything you create under source and main. For Java, you create in the Java. For the pages, for the templates, you create under templates. And another one is application YAML file. This is the configuration that you need to use. And one more important thing is the Pom Xml file. So the Pom file basically define the whole structure of this or the dependence of this application. So for us, we have the JPA dependence, we have the time-lived dependence, we have the web dependence, and we have some tools, and we also have like the validation and the cache. So the if you want to add any starter into this pom.xml file, you can either copy it in or use the plugin, the Spring Starter plugin, to add the starter into this file. And after that, you can see you should have two things you need to be aware. That is, number one, the Mervin, right? So you have the Mervin, and you can use the right key to clean it or install it or compile it. So this is the Mervin menu you can use. And the other thing is the Spring Boot dashboard. So you can see this dashboard, you can run it and you can debug it, you can stop it. So basically this is what the Spring extension can provide for you. Now we come to the time-lived. So time-lived is a template engine. This template engine is for the UI purpose. It's for the user interface, which is to the interface for the web interface. So you can see everything for time-lived. The template is under resources. And if the page is static, for example, your logo file, your style file, so you can put under static. For the dynamic file, it's called templates. You put it under the templates folder, and every template is a HTML file. So for example, the home. So home file, if you look at the home file, it's exactly a HTML file. Has the HTML tag, and has the table, has the cell. Everything is really HTML. So this is easy for us. If we know HTML, then we can create the templates. And the only thing you need to be aware is something like the TH. So TH stands for time lived. So the TH tag will help you to create a dynamic content. For example, in this page, we will create a table and we have a fixed header, but for the content, every line, every row, we use the TH tag to help us to create the content that we need. So basically, if you want to find the mapping between this thing is, so each ID is this post ID, okay? Each author is this post author, and each posted is the time, and the body is this body. So basically, this time-lived tags will help you to create dynamic content and showing up as a HTML page. Controllers. So MVC, so the second layer of MVC is controller. The controller will be put under Java. Usually you can have a controller folder to save all your controllers. For example, this home page, they usually will call a controller, which is this home controller. You can see that there is a get map in this controller, and it has a value of this thing, the slash, which is the home page. So basically, if you don't tap anything, that's the slash. So when you request Spring Boot server by this URL, they will come down to this method. So this method will serving the request. So if you look at the page here, if we refresh, you can see home controller serving the home page is exactly the message that we're showing up here, serving the home page. So every request or every refresh request come here will come to this method. So this method is serving the home page. Okay, so for every controller, you just need to mark it as a add controller, and this is the Spring Boot annotation to make it as a controller. Models. So the models file is like the data transfer object, or the file to hold the data or data information. For us, we have a post. So because every topic and every comment is actually a post. So for this post, we create a model file for that. This model file is actually, it looks very simple. There are just like some fields, but you need to understand a little bit about the annotations. Okay, for example, the entity annotation, it marks it as an entity. So it's an entity will talk to the database, and it has the table name for that model or that entity. So this generated value is about the key, and ID is talking about this is the primary ID. So this is something that you need to learn for the model class. The model class looks simple, but you need to be very careful with all the annotations, because the annotation will do a lot of things underneath for you. So if you make a mistake on the annotation, sometimes will get you wondering what's wrong, and you won't be able to easy to find the issue. Forms and validations. So forms, so for example, like this one. So if you want to add a new topic, this is a form. Okay, for this form, you have to create something in the time lived. For example, let me explain. So the add topics HTML is a form. So this form is a regular HTML form, However, you would have quite amount of like tags, which especially for the time-if tags to see, hey, this is which method you want, or this action and method and object. So this is the thing that you would need to understand in the form to create a thing. Even it's simple like that. It's just a text array, and what the text array need to have a field to the form is body. Okay, so and also you need to understand how to show the error is if it has error, and you would need to alert. Okay, so let me do a quick demo for showing the error. Let's see, I copy a lot of thing and I'm trying to post it here, because we say we restrict the form to only accept a certain amount of characters. So we will post, and they'll say post body must not exceed 250 characters, and this is the validation how we can achieve that. So this is achieved by the form validation. The form validation achieved is the form. There is a form being or form object. This form object would, because we have a simple form, we only have one field, but this field has a annotation called size, and the size is a validation, and maximum is 250. So that defines how many characters you can you allow user to put into this form. And the message is post body must not exist. So this is exactly the message you see here. So this is how you do the forms and its validations. Services. So we create the services is behind the controller. So we put quite amount of logic. So in the real application, usually the business logic is much more complicated than what we show here. So that's why we need a service layer for that purpose. And also, if you look at here, cacheable, so it's the best practice to cache whatever you want in the service layer instead of in the controller layer. So the service is marked or is annotated by the service annotation in Spring Boot, and in this Spring Boot service, we auto-wired a repository, which is a JPA concept, which we will talk about later, and we have the method to serve in the controller. And for this method, we make it a cacheable, and for this method, we make it a invalidate the cache. So you can see the services are mainly about the method, and it's a middleman between the repository and the controller and serving the controller. So this is service. JP and JPQL. So when we talk to the database, we in Spring Boot project, we normally use JPA. So for a JPA class, it's rather simple. However, there are quite a amount of things behind it. Let me explain. So usually you put your JPA class or repository class under a folder called data. And this JPA class, you can see it's very simple. Why we can have such a simple JPA class is because the Spring Boot has will do a lot of things underneath for you. So a repository in Spring Boot is actually an interface. It's not a class, so it's an interface, and it's annotated or marked by a repository annotation, and it's normally extended the other repository, but most popular one is called Crude Repository, which stands for creation read, update, and delete. And because most of the method is already created for you, so you don't need to create. If you just use the standard function, you just need to create that interface. You don't need to do anything in that interface. But in our case, we want to select the topics. So the topics is the post when there is no parent. So we have to create a query for that purpose. So this query use a query language is called JPQA. So the JPQA is looks like a real a normal or standard SQL, but it's a little bit different. For example, this post here is not the table name; is rather the object name, the class name. So if you remember that we have shown up the post class, the post class define a table. So that is how this JPQL connect to the database table. And you can also use the class name and its field in this JPQL. So when you use JPA, it's better to use JPQL unless the SQL is simple enough. You can use the native SQL, but otherwise using JPQL is a better way for the purpose. We can show up the post model. If you look at this post here, is this post. So this post has a table, okay? So it's a post table and it's an entity. So basically, that's how you connect JPQL to the model class. Authentication. So in this application, we use the Okta as the authentication provider. Okta is a service, authentication service that you can register for free, and you have 5 applications. The Spring Boot application you have to register as a web application, and also you can assign your users to this application. If you look at everything here in this Okta configuration or Okta dashboard, you can see the client ID and client secret, okay, and Okta domain. And this is the thing you need to configure in the application YAML file for the purpose. So this is the Okta author 2, and you need to configure the issuer. This is where you need the domain, which you copy from here, from this Okta domain, and the redirect URL. And this is a standard redirect URL. You just use this one. And the client ID is the Okta ID, which you copy from the client ID, and client secret is what you copy from the client secret. So this is how you configure the connection to Okta. In this file, you also see how we configure to the SQL database. So this is how you configure them, okay? This is everything would be in the application YAML file. Caching. Caching is not a must-have for a Spring project, but Spring has provided a very good caching solution for you. So if you use the caching solution wisely, or you can make the performance better. And quite amount of time in the consulting market, if you can create a good caching strategy, that worth a lot of money. So let me show you the caching. And the caching, the first thing, of course, you need to enable the caching dependence, which is here, okay? So this is how you get the dependency in. And then in the main class, you have to enable the cache, okay? And then in the service class, you have a cacheable, which is enable the cache, and cache invocate, so you invalidate the cache. So this is the concept of performance tuning. And of course, Spring Boot is much more than MVC. This is what we trying to let you understand is if you look at Spring Boot, okay, Spring Boot can be MVC. Also, Spring Boot can be the REST API and have a cloud functions and a gateway. So for MVC, you use browser as the front end, but if you move yourself to REST API, then you can have the Angular as the front end for the rich user experience. And you can have the mobile application also talk to Spring Boot through API. And you can talk to other API directly or talk to other APIs through the API gateway. And of course, you don't have to always talk to a SQL database. You can also talk to a NoSQL database, for example, the AWS DynamoDB. And authentication-wise, you can use OAuth 2.0 like Okta, or you can also talk directly to a LDAP server or LDAP repository. So Spring Boot is much more than MVC. Remember that. But for MVC, it's already enough to create a web application. It's a complete, and everything can build inside the MVC. So Spring Boot is very powerful, and hopefully, if you watch my channel, I will continue to talk about more about Spring Boot more than MVC. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.